Righty, here we go, Book War folks, for our, this might be our only February book talk, BiblioTalk. Now I can't remember, we may have done one earlier in the month. Just wait for Miss Haddi to show up, and we'll get her on here with me. Ooh, come on, we can do this. One go.
What? That never happens. Oh my god, it's like a miracle.
Yeah, we're gonna jinx it if we believed in jinxes, and it's gonna break. But not the point.
Probably my internet will go down in like 3 minutes or something. Is probably what will happen. I did check and make sure I was on the right network. So
you did your pre-work. You did the pre-work.
That's the thing that gets forgotten the most by far is actually checking to make sure I'm on the right network.
Yeah,
so
but
pat
you did
on the back for me. I did it today.
Well done, sis. Well done. But okay, well, hi.
I think we're like kind of matchy color wise. I'm wearing like a green scarf and you're wearing green earrings, and I'm wearing like the same color lipstick as your sweater.
Brown?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like brownish red. Is that kind of your sweater looks kind of
mine's like brown, but that's
okay.
Yeah, we're matchy. We did not do that on purpose.
We did not coordinate on purpose.
One of these days, we will wear the exact same outfit. That has happened before.
No doubt that will absolutely happen.
I couldn't remember. Is this our first BiblioTalk in February, or did we?
I think it is. I think February got a little away from us.
Yeah.
And I feel like this was because I think we were supposed to do it last week, so it was like more in the middle of the month, and then we couldn't do it last week, so we ended up doing this week. And I don't know if you realized, but we actually have another one next week.
Yeah, okay. I did notice that. I did notice that. Yeah.
Okay.
I did notice that when I was looking at my calendar today for next week. I was like, oh, well, there we go.
Hey, quick.
And next week, our BiblioTalk is going to be on our
boxes.
So that one is going to be fun. And probably a little on fire.
Yeah.
And we'll have to rein each other in because once one of us gets going, it can.
We promise our people who are watching that we absolutely will do our best to rein each other in.
Yeah. Okay. You said it. Yep, I got it. Everybody knows.
Okay, we get it. Everyone in the world gets it. We're moving on. Yeah.
But for tonight's BiblioTalk, we are talking about the two books that we read for the month of February. In 2024, we've decided to do this kind of monthly genre reading where we each actually pick a book. The genres were picked for us on Instagram?
Pinterest? Off of Instagram. No, not Instagram. That's this one. The other one.
Pinterest. And so February was memoirs, biographies, memoirs/biographies. And so I read a memoir. Yep. You all picked it, actually. The Book War community picked my memoir for the month, and Haddi read a biography. Yay! We did that one pretty well, actually.
Yeah, that one actually worked out really good. And we kind of were able to like read stuff that I think you really liked the thing that you read, and I really liked the thing that I read. So we had good picks this month. We did have good picks this month.
So well done, Book War, too, for voting for a really good book. Although I'm pretty sure all of them would have been good, but this was really good. So Haddi, do you want to start on your biography?
Totally start, yeah. So this month I decided, because we were in the genre thing, I'm like, I gotta read this genre thing. So I have been putting this book off for so long. I've literally probably had this on my shelf for maybe, I actually think since before 2020. I think we did the book swap with Mom before 2020.
I do actually think you're right. Yeah. That is right. We did do that.
And I got this from Mom on our very first book swap. It is Peter the Great, His Life and World by Robert K. Macy. And this, my friends, is why I put it off.
But you have to actually look at the words as well. Look at the print in that.
Open the book, just so that you have an idea, of how like dense reading this is.
It's not like big print. It's not. It doesn't have dialogue. There's no dialogue.
No dialogue. No. There is one tiny little bit of pictures, black and white pictures, not even color pictures. They're for like maybe 10 pages out of the 855. All 855 of the rest of the pages look like this. So anyway, I was putting it off because I was like, okay, I'm never going to win the book war. I'm never going to win the book war if I read these like ginormous books that I love. Honestly, I do love them. And I am happy to report that I was in no way, shape, or form disappointed by Peter the Great. It was super good. Here's the thing that I love about his writing. I've read, he's got a couple other ones out that I've read both of those. This one's Catherine the Great,
Oh, yeah.
also by Robert K. Macy, another big fatty, but a good one. And then you did Nicholas and Alexandra.
Right.
And
I would just like to report, I'm just going to name my own ignorance here. Haddi did have to tell me that all of those were Russian historical figures. So
yes.
I just want you all to know, as much as I read, there are huge swaths of things that I am an idiot about. Russian history is one of them. And Haddi was appalled.
Only a little bit, because here's the thing, because even as a person who reads quite a bit of history, there's still, like, I can probably name a lot of, like, areas in the world that I literally know, like, maybe where they're at, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, and nothing else. So, now Russia is a big swath that you don't know anything about. But yes, this, Robert K. Macy is obviously a Russian historian. And anyway,
it is not obvious, so I thank you for being clear about that, because it's not obvious to all of us.
To everybody. But yes, these are all and interestingly enough, Peter the Great was actually the beginning of the Romanov dynasty. And then Catherine the Great came after him, and she was part of the Romanov dynasty, although she kind of married into it from Germany. And then Nicholas and Alexandra were the last.
Yeah, I did know that.
Yeah,
because Disney's or Fox's or whoever's Anastasia taught me that, the animated version.
That was
of that story.
You're right. You got it. So anyway, but Robert K. Macy, I do want to kind of give a shout out to Robert K. Macy and his writing, because like these kinds of histories they are super dense. They just are. There's a lot of sort of information there, and they can be really hard to read because of that. And I absolutely have to say that Robert K. Macy does a great job of making these books very readable. They're very accessible. If you're willing to kind of put the time in, you know what I mean? It's more of like just a time thing, because there's so much there. But if you're willing to put the time in, the reading part is not difficult reading. And he does a really good job of it. It isn't always like super chronological. Like as you go through the book, it is like moving through his life, but each chapter isn't, they're more like theme chapters, or like there was this whole chapter about Peter the Great, his trip from Russia into Western Europe, and he was there for like 3 years, right? But that was the whole chapter, so it wasn't like, oh, in this year he was doing this, and then also doing this other stuff was going on.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so, and like there was this whole part where he hadn't talked too much about his son, about Peter the Great's son, and then there was this whole chapter about his son and kind of the and there was a lot of turmoil with his son, and I don't want to give anything away.
It's history, so I'm not sure there's spoilers exactly, but
there's not really spoilers in history. I believe that to be true. But there's like a whole sort of chapter about that sort of situation, right? Like once his son was older, and so you don't. It isn't kind of just this like chronological sort of thing that it's like everything that happened in this year, and then everything that happened in this year, and then everything that happened in this year, which can be a little bit difficult to read. I really appreciate the way that Maisie laid it out, being that there's so much to talk about. It was very sort of like, it was almost more like thematic, right? He would talk about certain people who were, yes, they're important at this moment in time, but they had stuff later as well, but sort of focusing later, and but focusing the writing on sort of like, oh, this person was very interesting at this particular time, and so we're going to bring them into the story in a big way right now, versus just like, oh, okay, in 1698 blah 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 blah, in 1699, that can be kind of horrible. So I just want to say I really appreciated that, and honestly, if you just even want to get, like, I am by no means a Russian historian at all. I had a really great professor who is a Russian historian when I was in grad school in the history program. And she kind of got me a little bit like, sort of like, oh, maybe there's some interesting stuff here, because she loved it, right? So this was her thing, and she lived in Russia for a long time. And so her excitement, I think, kind of like, it kind of like got.
I liked rocks for a while because my geology professor was so excited about geology. It was amazing. I was like, okay, geology's cool. And then I stopped going, and then class got over it, and I stopped caring about rock so much.
Didn't care about it as much, yeah. I did think it sort of ignited that, like, oh no, there is some interesting stuff there. Having her for my professor. But even if you're not like particularly, like, ooh, I want to like know everything there is to know about Russia, these aren't going to tell you everything you need to know about Russia, to be a historian or anything. But they do give you this sort of great, and I loved in this one too. He actually called it his life and world. There's a lot of like, if we're in the fiction world, we call it world building. But it wasn't world building because it was real.
But it is world building in putting him in a context.
Exactly.
The world context, just the world at the time. And for some of us who don't know anything about history, that is a very helpful tool to understand what in the world is going on.
Yeah. And there was so much back and forth between Russia and Western Europe.
Okay.
So like France, England, Germany, Sweden. Sweden played a huge role, which I had no idea that was a thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into it because it's not really relevant for this. But I learned like so much about really like what was sort of going on with this sort of like how Russia and their relationship sort of like to Western Europe and Scandinavian and how that was all, playing itself out. And then there's a ton of like the cultural stuff, which is super interesting because Russian culture is very distinct in a lot of different ways. And sort of like delving into that and why they had these, particular, cultural norms that differed from even a lot of the areas around, nearby. Russia was like, it's just like super interesting. So yeah, the quote unquote world building, was really fantastic. So it didn't always feel like sort of this doldrums of like, what's going on with Peter the Great. It felt like, okay, this is Peter the Great and his people in this like sort of amazing and interesting and intricate, cultural world.
That's really
that
cool.
you kind of get a little peek into. So I really appreciated that. Yeah. So overall, I would definitely say this was a win. I wasn't really concerned that it wasn't going to be good because I'd read the other two already and I knew it was going to be good.
Just happened to be the biggest one, right? Like it is the.
Yeah, I think it feels like it's the biggest one. Catherine the Great was pretty big too. I have the paperback of hers. Let's see. Oh yeah, hers is like nothing compared to that one. Poor Catherine only got 574 pages.
Oh, only 574.
Yeah. And it's like, it's the same size. It's the same size book. This one's smaller.
The Romanov?
Again, they only got like not even 600. Yeah, so Peter the Great got a lot more.
Peter the Great was the winner on that.
On the page.
On the pages.
On the page count. He was definitely the winner on the page count. And it was just like one of those like real big. It's like a big book, right? Like you put it next to this book, and it's like,
oof, that's a hefty book there. That is. That'll press some flowers. That'll press some flowers.
That would be an excellent book for pressing flowers if anybody needs that.
Flower press of a book.
Oh my goodness. So yes, no regrets. I'm glad I read it. And now there's like one more gigantic tome that's not looming over you any longer on my shelf. So I'm also grateful for that. Yay. So how was your book, Hannah?
Okay. So my book was, to bring everybody up to speed, was Hijab, Butch Blues by Lamia H. It's a memoir, and it was incredibly good. I have said this before, I do not love memoirs. We should actually put memoirs as part of our soapboxes.
Yeah. I'm writing it down on our list. I got my list.
Write that down on our list.
I'm writing it down on the list.
Memoirs are not my favorite genre. And particularly in the modern sense of memoirs. But I do have a few on my shelf, and so this was one of them. And I put up the Instagram voting poll. That's what they call it, a poll. And this one actually won by quite a lot over the other couple that I had up there. I only had a couple. But what I didn't know, I had picked it up. So I have read Stone Butch Blues, which is a memoir of a butch lesbian woman in the...
It's like mid-century, wasn't it?
Yeah,
like even earlier?
Like 50?
50?
It was around Stonewall. Yes, because it was around Stonewall. I know I should know dates, and I'm just I'm horrible with dates. So it was around mid-century. Yes. One of the hardest books I've ever read, actually.
Yeah.
That was a
Tough one.
difficult book. Good, but really difficult. So I picked this up because I really liked the play on words there.
Yep.
And what I didn't know about this book when I started reading it even was that what she has done is she is telling her story through stories of what I would call the Old Testament. So because of my Christian heritage, that's what I would call them. So she's telling her story through stories of Moses and Joseph and oh gosh, I just lost her name. Oh, that's terrible.
Me?
No.
Maybe Esther.
Sarah and Abram and Hagar. Sorry, I have to say them all together, and then I get it. And Hagar.
But yeah, separately.
And so so for me as a spiritual leader, like this is what I try to get people to do all the time, and I try to do for myself. Like these stories, these ancient stories, are stories that help us understand ourselves and places and ways that we can see ourselves and understand ourselves, and that there's like a great depth in that. And so that part of this was just incredible for me to read. At the same time, I was telling this to my best friend this past weekend, and I go, the only thing is I just know that there's more in there, like that she didn't go all the way to like the fullest, like the deepest places. And I was like, I just was disappointed by that. And my best friend goes, Hannah, she doesn't need to make herself bleed for you. And I was like, oh, that's a good point.
Yes.
That's a good point. But for me, there was that bit of like, I know that there's like another couple layers below what she says in here. Just based on the way she writes and talks and what she does say. And I just have and I just had these questions about like, I just wanted to pull that out a little bit more. And like, but that is accurate.
Yeah.
That is always the best idea when it comes to a memoir or any sort of public consumption of a book. So, Lamia H is a pen name. We do not know who she is. She's remaining, her anonymity is being maintained because, and I loved this part as well. I loved, maybe isn't the right word, but I liked that this is a memoir about a queer Muslim woman who immigrated to go to school here in the United States and became an immigrant. She lives in New York, and she's been able to stay and continue to work as well. And she's not what we would call in the Western culture, particularly American culture, out to her parents. She's maintained that secrecy around her queerness, and I think, and at the end of the book, there is she takes her girlfriend to her uncle's house, but it is as her friend. And I think at the end of it, it was really, I don't know if refreshing is the right word, but it felt so honest. And I think as Americans particularly, that's really the only cultural context I can speak to around queer culture. We have created some, like, you must be like this, you must be like this. And if you're, that there's like these lines of queerness that we've kind of like tried to create, which is just, I just was really happy to see a story like this out there as well. And that she's figuring that out and how to embrace that. And I think in a culture that has become so, obsessed maybe with our independence and like our individuality, that we have forgotten that the value of that communal familial relationship kind of loses its value. Like it just loses something for us, and like that is just what it is. And like I'm not necessarily judging that, but I think it was nice to see it's nice to see a public representation of a different path forward, and that it is still a path. And if that works for you, if that is how you choose, you are still queer, right? It's that public truth of your whole being, even if it doesn't fit into nice boxes that we would like it to fit into in the Americanized understanding, particularly the white patriarchal cultural milieu understanding of that. So I loved it. I really enjoyed the scene in her story and the way she reflects on her own life and teachings and who she is choosing to be in the world through these archetypes, these ancient stories, and how she's like working that out and wrestling with that. And it's not pretty and it doesn't feel good, but 20s, I don't remember the 20s, my 20s ever feeling good either, right? Like there's more for her than, I mean, she's like hitting like every single level of like marginalization in many, many ways. And then she continues to wear her hijab, and even in her communities, that was weird. That is weird in her community in New York. Like, why are you still doing this? Like, nobody else does this. This is what, so like, and I think these, what we would maybe call dissonant value sets, and that she's trying to find her way through those to find who she is and what is most authentic to who she is in the world. And I just love that. I mean, we're doing this thing at church, but like, I really like, this is the part of my life that I like, what my vocation that I love is like wrestling in those dissonant things and the things that feel contradictory, and like figuring out like a third way. How do we live in a third way? Because these dichotomies that we've set up are all a bunch of BS. So, and so getting to have a picture into that with her was really, really, really fun and meaningful for me, and from a lot of different perspectives. So
that's
highly recommend. Recommend. I wrote some notes. I forgot I did this. I wrote some notes. I'm just double checking.
Make sure you touched on everything
that one.
You wanted to bring up.
Like strength is marginalized from many different angles. Queer life that doesn't necessarily conform to Western values. I think I said it all.
Good job.
So I just love that. I was like, oh, that's
just write it down beforehand. You don't even need the notes because like it's in your brain because you.
Well, I wrote them down when I finished the book because I finished it because we were supposed to do this last week and then I couldn't do it.
That's right.
So I had it finished. I was like, oh, I got to write these down so I don't forget.
Yeah. Good job, Hannah.
But now I remembered them. Maybe just writing them down actually just helps me. So highly recommend. If I really, I just thought it was this will be one I think I'm going to keep on my shelves.
That's great. That sounds fantastic. Like, that feels like one that I might borrow, actually, snatch off your shelf one of these days. It sounds really good. And the two things I think you touched on that I'm just like, I'm loving, I love that she's like telling her story through these ancient stories. I think that's one of the things that gets lost about like sacred literature or just, or like folklore, or, just these sort of ancient stories that have been with us so long. We get to a point where we feel like they're sort of tired and sad and we need to move on. But so often they're actually the stories that we keep telling because they're still our stories, right? And to be able to for her to be able to actually see herself in those stories and then like, and like work through her own sort of, journey by doing that. I think that's just amazing. That's super intriguing to me. So I'm very interested to see how she did that.
Well, and I think the not rejection of the story, and for me, that's the texture of this of her life that is so beautiful and interesting to me, right? Like there are many reasons for her to have reject both these stories as well as her faith in general. As is true for most queer people across the board when it comes to religion, right? Like, full rejection because the church, people of faith have been terrible for centuries. So totally come by that naturally. So full rejection, I get that. But like, cannot do that and to find herself in them and to find the value of herself in them. Like, who she is and who God is, and finding some real truth that affirms the beauty of creation that she is. Like, that's good stuff.
That is good stuff. Yeah. And the other thing that you were just saying that I really love it because I think you're absolutely right. We get very stuck in our own sort of configurations of what queer stories look like, right? And how
Yes.
queer people
Right.
figure out that they're queer,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
come out,
Right.
and how they look and how they dress and how they are and how they exist and how they
Mm-hmm.
relate to everybody else
Mm-hmm.
around them.
Yep.
We have these very sort of particular ideas of what that looks like, right? We have particular stories
Right.
for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this idea that it's a disruption to a thing that we think is already disruptive, right?
Right.
We already
Right.
sort of think these stories are a disruption to the norm, right?
Right.
This heteronormative
Mm-hmm.
thing that's been
Right.
going on for way too long. So these stories are already disruptive, and we have a particular space for them, and it's about this big, just like everything else, right? And like to have her come in and be like, there's another story here, there's yet another story, another important story.
Mm-hmm.
I love that,
Yeah.
right? Like that's fantastic, and I think we need to be constantly reminded
Mm-hmm.
that all of these narratives and these
Mm-hmm.
stories that we think are sort of true
Right.
for groups of people.
Right. And by the way, that's true for heteronormative relationships
It
too, right? There's a
absolutely is.
very, it's called a fairy tale,
Yeah,
right? Like there's a very clear heteronormative
absolutely.
archetypical story that we start to put boundaries around, like this is how it's supposed to look.
Yep,
So like I just
absolutely.
want to be really clear that we do that in so many
in
different groups of
so
people.
in so many groups of
Right.
people. I mean,
And
like I can't tell
right.
you how many times, like my husband and I, we don't have any children, and we were never planning on having any children, but I can't tell you how many times people
Yeah.
asked how many when we're going to start having kids, and B informed us that we would change our minds about
Right.
not having children.
Yeah.
Because this is the heteronormative story, right?
Right. Yeah.
You get
Yes.
married, then you buy your
Yep.
house, and then you start having kids, and then you
Right.
have your dogs, and so on and so on, right? This is the story,
Property.
and if you
Your white picket
deviate,
fence. Yes. Yeah.
people are convinced that no, you're going to change your mind.
Mhm. Right.
You know,
So I just wanted to be clear though, because
yes,
I was
you're
feeling,
absolutely
oh
right. Yeah,
yeah, that we do that with everything. I was
with
thinking
everything.
also like in the publishing world where I follow a lot of Black authors, and like there was like an archetype
Yeah,
like of the terror and suffering of the Black population in America, and like that was the only story that was getting told. People were like, what about Black joy?
yeah, kidding.
Like there are places,
Yeah,
like you know what I mean, like and there were writers writing that stuff, but it wasn't the stuff that was getting
yeah.
sold or told, right? Like even like we just are really good at
We're
putting
good at that.
boxes
Mm-hmm.
around things and then expecting that, and that becomes a
Yeah.
norm that's not really a norm.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a real
Yeah.
norm. It's just what we think.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
yes, I agree. I love that about this book, that it didn't conform.
Yeah.
Anytime somebody doesn't conform, I'm usually pretty happy though. So that's
All
also true.
about that for
Why
sure. That's
I
fantastic.
do. It's why I love like genre bending books, because it's like, oh, they just not refuse to conform to the
Refuse to
genre.
conform to the genres.
Mhm. Except for my romance. I like my romance to conform to
Okay.
my genre. But that's a different topic.
But that's sort of the thing too. Like there is sort of a comfort in that, right? Like
Mhm.
for our comfort
Right.
reads, we do sort
Yep.
of like, I mean, in this context, we're
Right.
talking about reading, but for our comfort reads, we kind of want them to,
Yeah.
hit the
Yeah.
markers and,
Yeah.
pretty regularly and not give us too much to have to think
No.
about or to worry about or to,
No.
and that's why they're comfort reads, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
And
Yep.
then when we want to be challenged, we don't pick that up. We pick up something
We
else
don't pick
usually.
that up. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So that is true though. I do love a good nonconformist in all things.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
but
It's a
yeah.
good thing. Disruption
Yeah.
is good. It is. Interruption is
Yes.
good. Hmm.
Interruption. That is, yes.
Yeah.
And yes, to interrupt our
Yeah.
own ways of thinking and our own, which is, I think, for us, both of us, I'll say this on our behalf, but I
Yeah.
think that for us, what reading
Yeah.
does so much, and why we keep with the amount that we read,
Yeah.
and that does allow us to do this, is like why we can pick so many things that are interrupting,
Yeah.
like, and make us rethink certain things. I think, Haddi, you were telling the story at our book club about you had just read this book on Palestine
Yeah.
that had, and like you go and you teach these young college students about like how do we like change our brains,
Yeah.
like how do we change the frameworks from which we see the world.
Yeah.
And then you tell them this story. I'll stop
Yeah,
talking,
no,
you tell them this
I
story.
read, I was on a recommendation from one of our friends, and
Yep.
it was a history of Palestine, honestly. And And the part that was so sort of disruptive for me was the modern stuff. I all the ancient stuff, I was like, I had known that. Like I studied,
Right.
that area in college and so on and so forth. So everything up to about like 1800 or so, I was like, yeah, it was just sort of like, yeah, I kind of knew all that.
Mhm.
And then, but as Hannah knows, and as anybody who watches this knows, I don't read modern stuff if I can help it. Just
It might be a modern book, but it's not going to be about modern times.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But of course, this book, comes into the modern era and is talking about the history of Palestine and Israel and the whole area there. And there was so many things in this book that made me rethink. I've done a lot of biblical studies. I've done a lot of biblical archaeology stuff, and I absolutely my framework
Mhm.
for my love of these things had to be shifted after reading this book. I had never seen it from a perspective of harm, in the way that these things that I have always loved my whole life, these sort of like academic, inquiries,
Pursuits and
yeah,
inquiries, yeah.
have been used for harm.
Mhm.
And and obviously I'm not okay with that, right? So I literally had to, I was like, 40 something years old here, and I'm like reframing and rethinking
Mhm.
these things that I have been sort of like near and dear to my heart
Mhm.
for,
Mhm.
decades at this point. That I spent, time studying and learning and all this sort of thing, and loving.
Yeah.
Um, and having to really like shift that and just rethink, how am I going to engage in
Yeah.
that? Am I going to engage
Yeah.
in that, moving
Yep.
forward? And
Yep.
in what ways, if I do choose to engage, can I engage in a way that's not harmful, or
Mhm.
can at least start to maybe undo and or move
Right.
forward, undo some harm, or move forward in a way that's not harmful? And
Yeah.
having to do that kind of work and having to think
That
about
doesn't
that,
perpetuate the harm.
you
Yeah.
know, and if I hadn't read that book, I wouldn't have had this completely sort of like different perspective that I
Right.
like just never thought
Right.
about before,
Right. And I think what's so beautiful and interesting about that, though, too, is, and this is the part, I mean, I just love this, is that Haddi is not the most vulnerable human being on the whole planet. I'm just going to name that. I think she's fine
Maybe
with
not
me
the
saying
most vulnerable.
she's not the most vulnerable. But, like, to go into the integrity that it takes and the vulnerability it takes to go into a classroom and tell your students that who you are trying to help break some worldviews
Yeah,
or
yeah,
realign worldviews, and say, like, I'm 40 something
yeah.
and it just happened
And
to
I
me, and like
just
I'm
literally happened
realigning it,
last week.
and
you know?
I have to like re-examine all of these values that I've carried for so long and this stuff that I have loved, and
Yeah,
see the harm in it and see the harm that I've perpetuated in
yeah,
it. And I have to like wrestle with that. Like I have to do that work.
yeah.
And I just love that,
Mhm.
because I think, so often in classrooms it's like we just forget to like tell people that like this
Yeah.
is still stuff I'm
That we're
doing.
doing
Like
it too. Yeah.
I'm not asking you to do something that I did in my 20s. I mean, I
Right.
did do it in my 20s, but I'm still doing it
But
too,
still,
right? Like it does
yeah.
still happen. And I think I love that. I just love that
Mhm.
story. I think it's just a great
Yeah.
story.
Well, and I think like for 20-year-olds also, I mean, most of my students are like between 18 and 20. And I do think for them, it's important to understand that like in my class in particular, but in many things in life, there,
Hmm.
it is more, it's the journey, right? This
Right.
isn't a thing like that you're just going to like
Right.
come out of my class and then like know everything and be able to just sort of move on.
You
Um,
will never know
you
everything.
will
You
never
will always
know
be an
everything.
idiot. Just
You're never
accept
going to
that.
have all the
Yeah.
answers,
Yeah. Yep.
and you're going to be constantly, hopefully you're going to be sort of
Hmm.
constantly throughout your life, being called to task in the sense of like you have to reframe things, you have to rethink things because your
Yep.
perspective changed,
Right.
because of the knowledge
You've
that you now have,
gained. Right.
because of your experience, just because of all these other
Hmm.
things that haven't happened yet because you're only 18. you know
Right. Yeah.
um you
It's like that, a little bit of
know
that, like Maya Angelou. I'm pretty sure it's Maya Angelou quote. I'm not going to say it quite right, but like, once you know better, do
Mhm,
better, right?
mhm.
Like, you might not have known,
Yeah,
but once you
but
do,
now you do,
so
so
now do
now do
better. And
better.
yeah,
Yeah,
there is that kind of like that same piece of that, particularly with you in that book about Palestine, right?
yeah.
Like, I didn't
I
know.
didn't
I
know.
didn't see it. I hadn't,
Yeah,
and like, there's lots of reasons for that. We can have that discussion too, but like,
absolutely.
it
Yeah,
just
that's
wasn't
yeah,
a cognitively aware kind of thing. But like, once you know, you
yeah.
gotta
Then
do better.
you gotta do
Yeah.
better. Exactly.
So
Yep.
Man, we really touched on some really big topics today.
Woo!
Russia,
Sometimes we go
queerness,
there.
and
Yeah.
Palestine.
Yeah. We were kind of
Um,
all over the place today. Wow. Actually, now that you say that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
a little. Well, there we go then.
Yeah.
So that's what memoirs and biographies bring up.
I guess so. Well, we did sort of pick, interesting ones, I guess, given sort of just like the world context right now, like the
Right.
place that we're in right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But next Video Talk will be way lighter because we will literally just be complaining about the stuff that irks us.
yeah, we will try to keep. Maybe this will be our first soapbox episode will be on just like light soapboxes or like very like just personal pet peeve soapboxes. Maybe that's what we need to
do
call.
that. Yeah.
And then we can get to some of the more like we do have heavy.
We do have a few heavy ones that make us.
We have a couple heavy soapboxes. We lug them around.
We do. We lug them everywhere. Oh my gosh. And they are
our baggage is a lot, but we might have some light ones. We'll try to stick to them.
We'll try to do soapbox light next week because this week was a little intense.
Soapbox light. So anyway, so yes, join us next Sunday as well. You do still have time to join in the fun of a free book giveaway before the end of the month. You can go to our website, www.thebookwar.com, to find out how to do that. All the instructions are there. It's also to help get people to go to our website. So, yeah. And then, Haddi, anything else?
Nope. I don't. Oh, I was gonna say, just throw it out there that I think in March our genre read is historical fiction. And we should probably maybe try to pick our books for next week so that we can just tell everybody what we're gonna read.
Okay, I will do a poll. I just reorganized my to be read book shelf.
You did, Hannah.
I have to tell you what happened yesterday. So I have the one bookshelf that has like the doors, right? Like it's the old secretary, Graham's old secretary.
Yep.
So I told him, no, doesn't this look so much better? He's like, yeah. He's like, that's the books that you have that you're supposed to read. I'm like, well, some of them. I go, what did you think you built that bookshelf for over there? He's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
He was like honestly a little appalled. I'm like, honey, these books have been in your house for a long time.
Yeah. Like where have you been right now? They've been there a long time, buddy.
Quite this appalled about this.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was
I was going to say, because Hannah has more than an entire bookshelf devoted to her TBR list. Mine right now, I have a shelf. I have one shelf that is designated to books that are in my house that I plan on reading that I haven't read yet. Everything else is either read or like a textbook for school.
Right.
And right now, it's like 2/3 full, and I'm like, oh, this is getting insane. I got to start reading these books because this is getting out of control.
Getting out of control.
Yeah, my shelf is 2/3 full, so there's maybe like 10. I think there's maybe 12 on there right now, and I'm like, oh, this is getting bad, Haddi. You got to start reading these.
Yeah, I have a lot more than that.
Hannah's got.
I have a lot more than that.
A lot more.
But I will put a poll up this week I will go find my historical fiction ones. I think I have a couple. That is like one genre I
think you do.
Don't have a lot of, but I do have a couple. So I know I do have a couple. They're not like heavy ones. I think most of them are pretty light. Well,
that's okay.
Well, it doesn't matter. We'll find them. Yeah. I'll find them, and you guys can pick which ones I read for March. So
excellent, super fun.
Cool. All right. Well, then with that, happy reading. Enjoy your week, and we hopefully will see you here next Sunday. Same time, same place.
All right.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Night.